So let's take a look at what this pontiff is telling us about building bridges by referring to 4 images that I find in the joy of the gospel. The first is friendship. The first image the Pope uses for dialogue is friendship, which appears quite often in the joy of the gospel. As we take up the work of evangelization, Francis reminds us, we are called to find Christ in others, to lend our voice to their causes, but also to be their friends, to listen to them, to speak to them, to embrace the mysterious wisdom which God wishes to share with us through them. And similarly, he urges homilists to take the approach of Jesus in preaching, who engaged others by dialoguing with them. The Lord respected people for who and where they were. He befriended them. Jesus looked at people, the Pope said, seeing beyond their weaknesses and failings. But he also showed that he enjoyed talking with those he was calling. He enjoyed being with them. He wanted their friendship. I recently gave a talk to seminarians and told them that one basic trait of a good pastor is that you have to like people. Imagine that I even had to say that. It's no wonder that Jesus ended up his ministry by referring to those that he called as his friends. They are not just to be acquaintances, but friends. In all of this, Jesus is teaching us that friendships are the necessary affective prerequisite to having dialogue. For friendships transcend differences of opinion and conflicts. They bring comfort in trial, and they grow in moments of forgiveness and failing. Jesus understood all of this by showing patience and discipline in befriending those that he called to be his disciples. This is how God dialogues with his people. He befriends them. I would note that societies have long valued friendship as key to their health. In fact, centuries ago, Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics noted that friendships are particularly needed for the growth of civilization and especially for democracies. He remarked that while friendships like justice are not found in tyrannies, they are proper to democracies because, as he put it, the citizens, being equal, have much in common. We seem to have lost the value of friendships in our social relationships, and at times in the way that we relate to one another in the church, which too often is marked by enmity and animosity. There is an overly competitive character that defines how we relate to one another, emphasizing what divides rather than what we share in common. Jesus offers us a pathway to break out of the impasse of animosity, telling us to speak to one another with the aim of creating friendships. That is how Pope Francis asks us to take up dialogue as friends. The second image he gives us is church as mother. The Pope opens up further insights on dialogue when he speaks of the church this way. A loving mother speaks to her children in a way that shows that she loves them and wants only the best for them. She shows this love not just by teaching, but by listening. As the Pope says in the Joy of the Gospel, a good mother can recognize everything that God is bringing about in her children. She listens to their concerns and she learns from them. The spirit of love which reigns in a family guides both mother and child in their conversation. Therein they teach and learn, experience correction, and grow in their appreciation of what is good. My mother, who raised 9 children, was once asked if she loved any of her children more than the others. It was a trap. But her response was swift and sure. Only if they need it. Our dialogue with others has to be generous in giving space, being indulgent of limitations, convey that we want the good of the other, not a victory over them, and loving them more if they need it. The third image, fellow companions. The Pope also speaks of the need to be a companion, one who practices, as he puts it, the art of accompaniment as we dialogue with the other. It's an art that relies on the skill of listening, which is more than just hearing. It springs from an attitude that life is shared, as the word companion suggests, a sharing of bread with the other. Listening, Pope Francis tells us, is an openness of heart, which makes possible the closeness within, the closeness without which spiritual encounter cannot occur. Listening helps us find the right gesture and the right word, which shows that we are more than mere bystanders. Only through such respectful and compassionate listening can we enter on paths of true growth and awaken a yearning for the Christian ideal. This listening approach of a companion in which life is exchanged and shared has particular relevance, the Pope notes, for individual Catholics as they carry out their own personal baptismal responsibility to bring the gospel to all we meet. The believer's missionary discipleship should be both respectful and gentle, and as he puts it, requires patience when the other person speaks and shares his or her joys, hopes, and concerns for loved ones, or so many other heartfelt needs. Only afterwards is it possible to bring up God's word. And finally, the image that I found in his writing is a church that is synodal. Synod is a term that is somewhat new to most Catholics, and yet it's been part of the church's vocabulary from the first centuries, largely forgotten in the Western Church. Synod literally means walking with each other, journeying together. By recalling it, Pope Francis aims at achieving a new and deeper appreciation of the Second Vatican Council's teaching about the nature and the life of the Church. He unpacked his understanding of synodality, introduced in The Joy of the Gospel, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Synod of Bishops. There he affirmed that synodality is a constituent element of the Church, to the point that we must always speak of an ecclesial docens and an ecclesial decens, a teaching and a listening church. Since, as he put it, the flock likewise has an instinctive ability to discern the new ways that the Lord is revealing to the church. In a word, what this means is that the church is by its nature dialogical, comprised of people who are equally anointed with the Spirit through baptism. The faithful people, the College of Bishops, the Bishop of Rome, all listening to each other and all listening to the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth. The point that the Pope is making here is that dialogue is not something extraneous to the life of the Church, but at the heart of its very nature. And we should embrace it as a model going forward in discussing all the issues that we face today. Simply put, dialogue is not a dirty word, it's our word. With these four images, I want to offer some personal reflections on dialogue and building of common ground. It really does take a change of heart. Last year, I was having dinner with a major figure in the United States in the entertainment world, and he said to me, he wasn't Catholic, he said, can you tell me what makes this Pope tick? How can I understand him? And I said to him, well, you have to understand one thing. He really believes that Jesus rose from the dead and is alive and working in the church, in the world. And he's trying to figure out where the Lord is taking us. You would have thought I came in from Mars. But that sense of discernment, not so easily understood, is tied to the risen Lord. The Holy Father has a deep belief that the Lord is risen and he's leading the church. And it is our job to take up that discernment. It takes time. It involves discipline. Most importantly, it requires that we be prepared to let go of cherished beliefs and long-held biases. It is this willingness of Francis to let go of the unnecessary and explore uncharted waters that gives him internal freedom while unsettling some. At his 50th anniversary as a priest, Cardinal George was talking about the Holy Father and the election of Francis as Pope. And he said that he has decided, as people ask him about the Pope, what one word would best describe him? And he simply said, the man is free. Well, that internal freedom comes from years of practicing, it seems to me, the Ignatian exercises, in which discernment has been part of his life. He's had the freedom to let go of the unnecessary and explore uncharted waters. It requires, as the Pope has reminded us, an openness to continuous conversion. Or to say it another way, as a theologian friend of mine said, it requires that we become, as the Pope calls us, to be a humble church. Obviously, this means that as individual believers and as a people of God, we must have a change of heart if dialogue is to be successful and common ground is to be found. As you said so well in your 10th anniversary statement, reflections on the past looking to the future. If the initiative is to be effective, then it must be a journey beyond our personal preferences to the place where the Lord lives, in order that through this deeper dialogue, we can discern God's will. So I want to be clear. When I speak of the need for conversion, I'm not talking merely about people changing their hearts and their minds, agreeing with the Pope and other members of the Church in terms of his leadership, but a much more radical change of heart. One that begins with accepting that Christ is alive, acting in the Church, always doing something new, as the Pope puts it. Our task is to be attentive and alert, receptive and responsive through discernment of what the Lord is doing and where he's leading us. As a pastor, I am acutely aware that, generally speaking, we have not prepared our people to engage in the prayerful discernment necessary for there to be real dialogue. We are surrounded by a culture of competition and winner-take-all mindset. Nor have we prepared our priests and our pastoral leaders to integrate discernment in their pastoral practice. We've also depended on blueprint image of the church as though everything has been decided and charted out, and all we need to do is to follow a prearranged set of plans or rules, as though the ascension of Christ left us orphans, and then he really never meant it when he said, I will be with you to the end of time. Until the humble and hopeful mindset of discernment becomes our modus vivendi, dialogue and the search for common ground will continue to have its challenges. In order to move us forward to that goal, I would like to suggest to CTU and the other centers developing priests and lay ministers that it would be wise to include the art of practicing discernment in parish and other ecclesial expressions as part of your formation program. I want to say something too about the universal church. What I found inspiring in being appointed to the last synod is the call of Pope Francis that we speak openly, we air openly some of the neuralgic issues in the life of the church. And rather than ignoring those differences, the successor Peter encouraged the bishops to speak boldly and never utter the words, "You can't say that." We're not a church of preservation, but rather a church of proclamation. Of course, all of this will allow us to more fully engage the civic community and the culture. In fact, in these years of Renew My Church, we do not want to be focused only on the internal life of the church, that to the point that we would ignore what's happening in the world. Our engagement with the world is also a part of the dialogical nature of the church. The church is not fully church if it lacks dialogue. Dialogue and synodality have taken root in the life of the church, and we should be proud of what we see as we look across the landscape of the church in this country. That is all that Cardinal Bernardine ever wanted as he launched this effort. Well, we can readily admit that there are yet challenges and obstacles ahead. He would tell us to keep moving. He would tell us, don't delay. For there must be urgency to put aside what divides us and seek common ground. In fact, that is what he counseled in that last public address which I cited earlier, and now rely on as I make his words my own. To say it quite boldly, he remarked, it is wrong to waste the precious gift of time given to us as God's chosen servants on acrimony and division. As I have said before, just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we cannot do something. So get to work. Thank you.